Hi there, I'm Wendy and I'm from Wehago Designs. I love to hand quilt, and today I thought I'd just give you a little bit of a demo of how I go about quilting at my frame. This is a quilt I've just started today and I'm working on the border. I've stitched down the absolute edge, so in the last eighth of the edge, so it just holds it all neatly and I don't have to worry about later when I go to bind. I've actually got 2 threads already in the quilt at the moment, and I'm using a Shishiko needle, a small one, and number 12 weight Aurifil thread, which is a little bit thicker than your normal thread, but it quilts up really quickly. I've got 11 days to do this quilt and it's 80 inches by 80 inches, so here goes. I'm just going to move the iPad so that you can see my hands a little bit better. You won't see me, but I'll keep chatting to you. I've been quilting for about 20 years, maybe a little bit more. Sometimes I mark my quilts, it depends on what I'm doing. With this design I'm doing a sort of a zigzag which forms a little square in part of it, so I'm just going from one corner to the next, and I don't mark, I just watch where I'm going and just aim for that. If it's slightly out, it's slightly out, but generally it's pretty spot on. And I like to have a little bit of movement for my eyes anyway, where everything's completely perfect. Our eyes don't appreciate the work as much, because your eyes just look at it and go, oh, that looks good. But if you've created a little bit of movement and intrigue for the eyes, people are more inclined to keep going. So basically I don't have my quilt too tight in my frame, and the same if I was working in a hoop, I wouldn't have it too tight. So I start by going straight down, and I've got my hand underneath, but I don't really let my hand prick, and as soon as it goes under I poke it back up with my finger, and then I go back down perpendicular and back up again. So I just get this rocking motion going. We've got a thunderstorm coming through at the moment. I'm not sure if you can hear it, but it would be lovely to have some rain here today. It's been very, very dry. That's through to that side. Now, I quilt away from me with my thumb, as I've just done there, but I also quilt towards me with my middle finger. So I'm just going to swap direction. And because it's on the border, I don't go right to the edge, I go 1/4 of an inch in, because if I went right to the edge, when I put the binding on, I would lose that point. So I just, after all these years, I know where 1/4 inch is, so I just go to that point. Now I've got one that's been a bit funny. I normally take about 3 or 4 stitches. Depends. If I'm going through a seam, I might only take 1 or 2 stitches, because through a seam it's a bit harder. And if you're beginning, try and think about how you're going to quilt it, and maybe don't quilt through seams, because it is harder too. And if you're using fine thread and fine needles, you can bend the needles. And it's important to also use a wadding that has no scrim in it. Now, if you don't know what scrim is the glue that they put in the wadding to hold it together. And it's very good for machine quilting or quilts that you don't, especially machine quilting, because if you don't want to quilt it to death, so to speak, it will hold together. There's no need to do really close quilting. I'm using Hobbs Tuscany wool here today, and that can be quilted up to 4 inches apart. I tend to quilt it a little bit closer, but because it works so quickly together when I quilt, I don't mind quilting it a bit closer. So I've come to nearly the end of this thread, and I'm just going to maneuver this so you can see this. I'll just do a couple of stitches in the other direction because I don't want to end it in a seam. So I've got enough to go a couple of directions the other way, and then I'm going to wrap my needle, hoping you can see this, around a couple of times the thread, and then I'll pull the needle through, and still holding that knot with the other hand, I'll make a little knot, and the knot's about there. And then I'll just take my thread through as I would a normal stitch, but I don't go right down the back. I can feel underneath, I can feel the needle, and then I poke back up the top, but the needle hasn't gone through the backing, it's underneath the backing. I can feel it going through that thread, and I just pop that, and that is now through. So I can now end off that thread, and I can start again. Now I'll just start the next, I'll thread the needle and start the next one so that you can see how I start. Because this is a frame and I don't have to baste my quilt, it's a 3-railed frame, so one rail takes the backing, the other takes the front and the wadding, and then the front rail, it all rolls on together. Because of that, I don't have to baste, and you start at the bottom right or the bottom left corner, and you work your way along the row or as much as you can, and then you bring it forward. I like to do the borders, and then I generally sort of work in rows because I find that's very reasonable, unless I've got a very overall pattern happening. Now I've just tied my knot, my quilter's knot, so that's all there, and I want to come up at this point. So I'll go in a little bit away, like a needle thread away, and I'll just poke up to where the next part of the needle should be coming up, and I just give it a gentle tug, and you'll hear a little pop in a minute. No? Doesn't want to pop. There, popped through, and snug as a bug and tight, and ready for me to quilt away to the end of this border. Okay, till next time, I hope that's been informative for you, and we'll catch you later. Bye.